I'm Doug. Welcome to Backcountry, Pilgrim, a channel devoted to hiking, backpacking, and camping. If you are into those things, why don't you click subscribe, because that's what this channel is all about. And today I want to talk to you about the safety gear that I used when I climbed Half Dome. If you are a subscriber to the channel, you probably saw last week where I made a bucket list hike, the 17-mile loop that included climbing Half Dome in Yosemite. Now, as I said in the video, I have a fairly debilitating fear of heights many times, and so I was not sure at any point during this hike that I was going to make it until I was all the way up and back down. Something that helped me out quite a bit, psychologically if nothing else, was the safety gear that I brought for my ascent of the cable section of the hike. A section that is steep enough that cables are required to kind of haul yourself up the last 600 or so feet. Now, when I say required, what I mean is for the average person with average gear. Even with my super grippy ultra lone peaks, I still had some sections of the climb where I basically was not sticking to the rock at all. It was either too steep or too slippery, and I had to completely rely on hands and arms to get me up to the next section. And in those instances, it was really nice to have some safety gear, which I'd like to go over today and then give you my thoughts on, because I'm kind of rethinking how it should probably be done now that I've been up there. So first, let me explain what I brought. Because you're hauling yourself up on the cables, gloves are pretty much a non-negotiable. And the ones that I brought are appropriately named Mad Grip. Specifically, these are the Pro Palm Knuckler gloves, and I've got links in the description of the video below to all the gear I'm going to talk about, so feel free to go down there and check it out if you would like. But these were amazing. Super, super grippy. They were recommended on a video by Mr. Half Dome. They are a mix of incredibly grippy rubber-like substance, but they also are ventilated so that you aren't just sweating yourself out inside the gloves. They did extremely well on the way up. Not quite as well on the way down, where the grip actually becomes something of a problem. I'll get to that later. But I would strongly recommend these gloves. They're not expensive, and if you kind of tear them up like I did, you won't feel too bad at the end of the hike. Now, to go up the cables, many people recommend going hand over hand up a single cable, kind of like you would climb a rope. I didn't personally find that very comfortable, and I preferred the two-cable version, at least when there wasn't anybody coming down or passing me. Now, the way the cables are installed, they are bolted into the side of Half Dome. You might have heard that in the off-season the cables are down, and then they are brought back up when the season begins. A lot of people have been confused about what that means. The cables never actually come off of Half Dome. They literally just lay down on the rock when they are not being held up by support poles. And it's those poles actually that come up and down in between seasons, not the cables themselves. So if you search around, you can pretty easily find videos of people climbing Half Dome when the cables are down, because they are still available and I would say still necessary to get to the top. Now, that might sound really scary, but I'll tell you, having been up there, I actually think that might be a better idea, and I'll tell you why at the end of the video. But for most hikers, they're going to go up when the cables are up, namely when the poles are in place. And what these consist of are about 3, maybe 4 foot high poles with loops at the top that the cables go through. And these poles are set in holes in the rock. They are not bolted in, they're just set in. And then between most of the poles is about a 1-inch plank that is attached that gives you a little bit of a toe hold to stand on if you need a break. Now, what this means is that about every 10 feet you have to let go, reach up over the top to the cable on the other side, and continue going up. And that is important to realize when you're considering safety gear. Now, in rock climbing, safety gear basically consists of a climbing harness and some kind of rope system that attaches you to it so that if you fall, the rope will catch you. On the Half Dome cables, though, things are a bit different. You never really come to a portion where you could end up in free fall unless you actually fall all the way through the cable system and off the side. So a rope system isn't really going to do the trick, and there's nowhere to put it. So my idea, like a lot of other people's, was to set up a short sling system on Carabiners that I could use to basically just attach myself to the cables with about a 3-foot lead. And that way, if I slipped or fell, I would get caught by the cable, and worst case scenario, I would slide down about 10 feet to the next pole, which would then stop the Carabiners and me from going any farther. So what I had was just a basic climbing harness and a 4-foot sling that I fashioned into a system to keep me attached to the cables. Now, for those who don't know, a climbing harness is basically a hip belt with two leg belts coming off the bottom, and it has a series of gear attachment loops and the more important belay loop that actually attaches you to the gear that is going to keep you from falling. A sling is a piece of nylon that is put together into a loop, and this allows you to quickly and easily tie it onto the harness and then attach carabiners to attach you to cables. What you do is you basically get the loop in half. This part goes through the belay loop like this, and then you simply pull the two other ends through and tighten, and that gives you two loops that you can attach carabiners to. I got the black diamond rock locks. So you put one of these through each of the loops, and then you have a dual carabiner system that attaches to the cable. Now, the reason you want two is that if you're sliding along up the cable and you come to one of those poles, the carabiner won't go through the pole. And you don't want to unclip and then reach around and clip back on and be unclipped for a few seconds while you're doing that. So if you have two, you slide one up to the pole, you clip the other one above it past the pole, then you unclip this one and either hang it on your belt or put it on the cable too, and you go up the next 10 feet to the next section, and you repeat all the way up. Of the people I saw that did use safety gear, this was basically the same setup that they had. Other than weather, probably the biggest enemy of safety on Half Dome is just plain old fear, panic. People get up high, they start to think about what's going to happen if they slip, and their mind just locks up and they freak out and they grab onto a pole and sit down, and that's kind of the end. And this happens numerous times a year from what I hear. So for me, I knew that I had the physical ability to climb up and down Half Dome. I mean, pretty much anybody in relatively decent shape does. I just needed something to keep me from freaking out up there. However, it did have some pretty serious downfalls, and this is where I want to kind of give a critique of this particular system and talk about some other systems that you might consider if you're looking to climb Half Dome with a little bit more safety than just holding on real tight with your hands. The biggest problem that I found with this particular setup is that when I would get to a pole and step on one of those planks to kind of stand on for a second while I move the carabiner, I would actually get stuck before I could stand up. And the reason is that because the poles are sticking out from the rock face, by the time you get to a plank and stand up, you're actually several feet from the top of the pole, and that means that your strap system is now pulling you backward until you can reach back, unclip, and clip onto the cable and stand back up. Now, that is not a very great move to be making while you're up there. It takes time and it takes energy, both of which could be better spent getting you up and down Half Dome. On the way down, this was particularly irritating, because as I came to a pole, I would not only have to stop at every single section, and there's like 60 or 65 of these by the time you get to the bottom, but because of the pole placement, I would literally have to hang onto the cable, lean out over Half Dome, unclip, clip back on, and then kind of waddle a little bit down the rock until I could stand up again, and then go to the next section and repeat over and over and over and over again. And that actually was far more dangerous of a move and far more tiring of a move than just walking down the cables would have been. Another problem with this particular system is that slings are not designed to catch a fall. Climbing ropes are actually quite dynamic, and what that means is that they stretch when weight is applied to them. If your body falls, it does not take gravity very long to get your body to a speed where you're going to be in serious physical distress if you stop suddenly. And that's why climbers use dynamic ropes, because when you fall on a climbing rope, it's a nice, slow halt to your fall rather than an abrupt one. But a sling is not dynamic. It's not meant to be, because it's not meant to catch you when you're falling. A sling is to keep you in place while you do other stuff during a climb. And what that means is, however far you fall on a sling, that's what it's going to be when you get to the end of the sling. So what's the worst case scenario on Half Dome? If you were as far up on your sling as you could get, like right up against one of those poles, and let's say you're leaning back trying to unclip and you fall. Well, first of all, you're going to fall the length of your sling leads, which in this case is going to be about 3 feet. Then the carabiners are going to slide all the way to the next pole, which is about 10 feet. And then you're going to fall the length of the sling again before it suddenly stops you, which means, in theory, you could fall nearly 2 stories before that sling suddenly slams you to a stop. Now, in a rock fall situation, that could be seriously damaging to your body, even deadly. So why did I do it anyway? Well, because if you're on the cables and you're clipped into them, you're not going to get into a free fall situation. If you slip and fall, you're basically going to slide down granite until you get caught. It's just not the kind of situation that you could find yourself in when you're in a Class 5 rock climb. Now, if you're really committed to the dual carabiner system that I've described, there is a piece of climbing gear you can get that works basically the same way, but is designed to stop a vertical fall. And that's known as a via Ferrata system. You can look it up yourself. I won't go into details here, but essentially what it is a dual strap, dual carabiner system that ties into a climbing harness, but instead of just having a completely static line, it's got a dynamic system that will slow you down gradually before you come to the end of your system. I just knew that for me, I was really mostly doing this for psychological reasons. I didn't really expect to fall, and if I did, I knew that it would be more of a slide than a free fall, so I was willing to kind of take the risk on the Sling system. On the way down, believe it or not, you actually get into something of a rhythm, and I think it's actually safer to be able to keep that rhythm than to constantly have to halt, even when you don't need to for any other reason, just to move safety gear. Again, that's like 65 additional moves, putting yourself in a somewhat precarious situation. The other way that rhythm gets broken is by having super grippy gloves. It's just hard to get down the cables when your gloves are trying to keep your hands stuck to the cable. Now, I didn't really have too much problem with this. I basically just sacrificed these gloves on the way down, and I knew that as hard as I was pushing them on the cable, they were probably not going to last very long. There is definitely some compromise to the gloves because of my descent and how much pressure and friction I was putting on these on the way down. A lot of people just use regular like leather gardening gloves and they say they work just fine, and they might work even better on the way down. So what do people do when they climb the Half Dome cables when they're not being supported by the poles? Well, in this case, you do actually need some real climbing knowledge. The safety system that I have seen recommended time and again is a prusik knot system. A prusik knot is made by taking a loop of cordage or climbing rope, wrapping it around a larger rope or cable, and fashioning it into a kind of ascender that will slide when you move it but will lock if you fall on it. You attach those to a climbing harness or make a Swiss seat out of a rope, and up you go. Now, if you trust that system, and again, lots of people have been successful with it, the nice thing about it is that you don't have those poles in your way stopping your ascent or your descent. And because your ascender system can stop anywhere, you can just go until you feel like stopping, and then just lean back and stand there until you're ready to go again. Moreover, when you're climbing the cables when they're down, not a lot of other people are doing it, which means no one's in your way, and you're not having to lean out over the edge while people knock past you with their backpacks on. You will probably have the entire ascent and descent to yourself. The only times you would have to stop on your ascent or descent is when the cable sections end in the rock. Having said all that about safety gear, what I would recommend is this. You do what you feel you need to do. Half Dome is no joke. Yes, hundreds of people a day climb Half Dome, but there have been numerous deaths as well. Now, some of those deaths really have nothing to do with the danger of the climb. A lot of them have to do with weather. That's a danger of the climate, but not really a danger of the climb. I would say that in general, if you are a fairly fit person, the climb up Half Dome is relatively safe. The vast majority of people who do it do not use any safety gear of any kind. However, I personally think that's too much of a risk to take. If you're pretty confident on steep rock and you're pretty confident in your strength and your abilities, you can probably do just fine without it. However, if you are going to use safety gear, be smart about what you're using. I've heard of people trying to use the 2 carabiner system, but they terminated it at their hip belt of their backpack or just their pants belt. A fall onto a system like that not only would probably fail because the buckles are not meant to take that kind of force, but if they don't fail, it could mean internal organ damage or even death if you actually took a hard fall onto that system. So if you decide to climb Half Dome, be smart, be safe, and have a great time. Alright, I hope this video has helped you out. If it has, would you mind giving it a like? And again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I love hearing from you in the comments. Till next time, I'm Doug. This is Backcountry Pilgrim. Take it easy.